Our speaker for tonight is Matt Orsie. He is a well-respected, experienced birder who has lived in West Virginia for over 23 years, but he's birded all over North America. He's a tour guide for Wings and a member of the West Virginia Birds Records Committee. And we are delighted that he was available to speak to our chapter this evening. So thanks, Matt, and feel free to start your presentation. I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, well, that's step one. Step two will be, can you see me? Well, I know you all can't see me per se because if you saw my screen, you notice it's a gray screen, right? And it's because my laptop's facing the walls. And so I'll just let you know, I'm probably somewhere between Terry Bradshaw and George Clooney and more towards the Terry Bradshaw side. So that's basically what I look like. Let me know when you can see my screen and then I'll fire it up to full mode.
Yep, we can see your screen. Yep.
Okay. Let's see what this does. Still good?
Yeah, I think so. There might be a bit of a lag.
You see the full screen? The only thing on the screen is the first slide.
We can still see like the PowerPoint stuff.
Yeah. I wonder why when I say from current slide, it's not happening. Well, that's not fun. Let's try this. You still just see the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah.
All right. Let me see what my advanced sharing options are. No. All right, so I don't know why that's not sharing my screen when I said told it to share my screen. I guess we'll just have to go with this, which is not good because I've got a lot of builds in the screen. So that's not fun. All right. Let's see, it doesn't say share the entire desktop, does it? It just says share the screen. I assume that's the entire desktop. Let me go here. Still see the screen, right? Isn't this fun, folks? Hold on.
Yeah, we can see your oh, there you go. You got it.
Ah, different share mode. All right. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks, Hannah. And thanks for the introduction. For those of you that don't know me, I have been birding all my birding life as a resident of West Virginia. And since I've lived in West Virginia 23 years, you can do the math. I'll tell you how long I've been bird watcher. And one of the families I got enamored with very early on were hawks and eagles and raptors in general. And one thing leads to another, you know, just like when you first started bird watching, you get binoculars and then you get a book and then you start hanging feeders. And the next thing you know, you might be taking a trip somewhere. So one of those evolutions for me was to go to a hawk watching site in fall migration. As some of you may or may not know, there is a network of hawk watch sites in the spring, but mostly in the fall, along the East Coast from Canada all the way down to Veracruz, Mexico, monitoring the different species of raptors as they migrate. And I visited a hawk site called Wagner's Gap, which is just outside of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And it's still to this day probably my favorite place to go for diversity and variety in eastern raptors during migration. So one thing leads to another, and now I became, over time, a hawk counter at Snickers Gap in Virginia, which is a hawk watch site in the database of hawk watch sites, and became a counter and a compiler there. So one thing leads to another, and you spend time, and it's so fun, and there's nothing more beautiful than seeing hawks and falcons and accipiters and harriers either close when they're right on top of you or when they look like gnats in a spotting scope. And I literally mean when they look like gnats. And your identification skills change. Believe me, I'll get to another slide in a second. But one thing leads to another. And so this is sort of an overview of things I've picked up and things that are the baseline things. Hopefully you might learn something new today that help you identify a raptor in flight and sitting. And because sometimes you only get a few seconds of a look as they go zooming by and you go, what was that? And you think you know what it is, but you're not sure. So maybe this will give you a little bit more of a handle. And did the screen advance for y'all? I hope it did. So how do you know what you're seeing? Well, when it comes to identifying raptors on the wing, general impressions of shape and size, and of course behavior, not unlike identifying any bird on the ground or other birds or passerine or shorebirds. The same rule applies. You can definitely, and sometimes that's all you have to go by is shape, size, and behavior, because sometimes the lighting's not great. It won't be great. Different things, different angles. So putting all these aggregate of characteristics together is how you get to an identification. So first, and excuse, if you don't like the builds, I apologize. These are showing basically silhouettes of the different major groups of raptors, the accipiters, the buteos, the falcons, and the eagle. And I'll talk about the ones we see the most in the east, in the Northeast, and in our section of the country. So we're going to start with accipiters. Everybody knows what an accipiter is, right? Most of you, you probably see them snacking on your birds at your feeders from time to time, or trying to. They are forest dwellers. We have two primary accipiters that, well, three, but two basic main ones that hang out in the state are, and I'll talk about that in a second, but they are built for speed, baby. And you see that long tail in the silhouette, that they can maneuver in a heartbeat going a jillion miles an hour. And that's how they can, when they see a bird and a bird goes diving into a tree or flying into the woods or diving into a bush, that's how they can maneuver so adeptly and get into the bush and the trees and be able to maybe catch whatever they were looking for. So short rounded wings, long narrow tail, in migration or an open habitat. And you see two silhouettes there, and they very, very well match. It's a beautiful picture on the bottom of a Cooper's hawk, which we'll talk about in a second. And are you seeing this okay as I go through?
Yep, everything looks
okay,
good.
Just wanted to make sure I wasn't talking to the first slide all the time. All right. Sharp-shinned hawk, the smallest accipiter. Not very large. It's about the size of a blue jay, believe it or not. Blue jay's about, what, 11 inches? A male sharp-shinned's about 11 inches. Females in the raptors, as in a lot of birds, are larger than their male counterparts by 10 to 20% on average. If you look at this bird, this sharp-shin, how do we identify that? So here's some of the traits, and I'm not going to regurgitate. You can read as well as I can, but I'm just going to point out the salient points. Notice if I do the mouse on the screen, can you see me moving the mouse like this?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. Up here, this Sharpie, as it's affectionately called, you notice how the wings, the head barely, this is the wrist of the wings, and it's in a glide. You notice how the head barely protrudes past the front of the wrists. That's one clue. Short rounded wings. Nice. It's not proportionally a nice ratio body to wing length. Tail appears squarish. about 80 to 90% of the time. There are times when that is not a definitive identifier for a sharp shin, but that's a good one to go on 80 to 90% of the time is the square tail. But as we all know, wing molt and tails can wear, and outer tail feathers can wear and fall off and get rounded. And sometimes you might get a sharp shin that really is a Cooper's hawk. But there's a couple things, and we'll talk about why it might not be a Cooper's hawk. If it looks like this on a glide and you see barely a head projecting past the wrists, the odds are it's that's the first characteristic of a sharp shin, in addition to the proportion of body to wing length. Over here, you see a beautiful young Sharpie sitting in a tree. A lot of these pictures are mine. Some of them are not. Some of them are from Cornell. I've labeled some that are not. I want to give people credit. On a lot of, these aren't all my pictures, but a lot of them, some of them are. So the wing beat for a sharp shin. This is a behavioral identifier. Very snappy. When the sharp shin flaps, it has a tendency to flap in rapid succession, many beats and then stop, and many beats and then stop. And a Cooper's hawk is not as snappy or as emphatic and as rapid a beat. Okay, so that's a behavioral characteristic of a sharp shin. I don't want to say it flaps like a butterfly, but I can. But you know how butterfly wings just go nuts, right? When you see a sharp shin gliding and then trying to pick up some wind and flaps, especially from migration, it has a rapid wing beat. So that's one great characteristic of the sharp shin. Okay, its bigger cousin, the Cooper's hawk, medium-sized accipiter, same characteristic, short. When it says rounded wings, it means around the feathers, around what we call the fingers of the primaries, P10, 9, 8, 7, 6. These are the primary feathers on the wing. They're the same characteristics between that and the Sharpie, but the difference would be, notice how it has pretty much a straight, this is a Cooper's hawk in a glide, a young Cooper's hawk in a glide. Notice how it has a pretty straight wing going right through the body all the way down. Protruding head. So it gives the impression, as opposed to the sharp shin, of a much more head projection. And that's a big characteristic on identifying the differences. Long rounded tail. Again, this is one of the identifiers of Cooper's. It has more of a rounded tail. And that's good in 80, 90% of the cases. And here's an adult Cooper's down at the bottom left. A nice picture. Wing beat, stiffer than the Sharpie. This is relative to the Sharpie. Shallow. Shallow means it's not flapping its wings down really, really low. It's taking a shallow wing beat. And slower. So again, how do you know the difference? Well, you got to see a lot of them and compare in your own mind. I'm just giving you the clues for what to look for. And then what brings you to the identification of a Cooper's over a sharp shin is a combination of how you digest the information. You and I might digest the information a little bit different, but hopefully we're digesting the same information so we get to the same identification. There's a great picture of two of them in the same view at the same time. Great picture by Jay McGowan. Notice how the Coopers, much longer, looking proportionally. Look how long from the tip of the tail to the head this bird looks as opposed to the sharp shin. And again, the sharp shin, you see the wrists are projected out, so there's hardly any head projection beyond the wrists. And here's more of a Cooper's, more of a flying cross as opposed to the T. So putting all the clues together, that these are in flight, good clues on how to differentiate a sharp shin from a Cooper's hawk. And there is no overlap. Now, not that you're going to go out and measure the birds unless you band them. There's no overlap in size between sharp shins and Coopers. So even a female sharp shin, which is the bigger, and the male Coopers do not overlap in size. They're close, but they don't overlap. Northern goshawk. We don't see very many of these because people don't really look for them. And then when you do find, they usually find you. If you get close to a nest area of the northern goshawk, you will be straight. You will be dive bombed. You will hear loud noises. In West Virginia, we do have breeding northern goshawks. They are rare. They breed in the highest elevations in our mountainous sections, like Cheat Mountain, and Barton Knob, down in Randolph County, Pocahontas County. It's a great place to try to find a northern goshawk in breeding season. You notice the difference. Look how this male, beautiful adult, how bulky that body is. And this big wide tail and how wide the wings are compared to the Coopers and the Sharpshin. Still a longish tail, but still compared to a Cooper's and the Sharpshin. You'll also notice, if you can see here, a very white supercilium, which is what they call the eyebrow above the eye, stands out, especially when the sun hits it. And that's a good identifying factor. So chunky, long and heavy looking. This is a picture down in the lower left of a northern goshawk that I took from that Wagner's Gap near Carlisle, Pennsylvania. They usually will migrate starting in right around Halloween through November, not in big numbers though. And their numbers have went down in the last 10 to 15 years as far as what's being recorded in the migration areas in the east. Now there's a lot of environmental considerations of why that might be happening. Well, a lot of birds, why are they not migrating anymore? Well, is it the numbers are down? Well, I don't know. Is it that the climate's a little warmer, so they don't have to migrate south as far anymore for food? That could be a contributing factor. So a lot of things contribute into why bird numbers fluctuate. But this is a beautiful young goshawk, and you can still see the supercilium. Not a great picture, but you know it was out there about a half mile. So this is a super crop, but it's always exciting seeing a goshawk in flight. All right, let's get on to our favorite, or what we see the most of, I should say. Buteos, soaring hawks, take advantage of thermals and air currents, found in open areas, forest areas with margins of fields, good for hunting because they love voles and smaller critters, characterized by long, wide wings. Look at the silhouette. Good picture of a buteo, and we'll get to the perfect buteo in a second. Or the quintessential. The red-tailed. All year round in West Virginia. The silhouette showing broad wings, fingers. You see the fingers really are predominant. The fingers are those outer primaries on the wings. They have a relatively short tail compared to obviously the body length, and also compared to accipiter proportionally, but still a nice tail nonetheless. That first picture was an adult, a pure brick red tail, and this picture on the left is a young bird with the thin brown barring you can see in the tail. And we'll get to more identifications. And that's what you typically would see in flight. Squarish wingtips, the patagial area. That is, if you see a bird with this patagial dark area, you've got yourself a red tail. I don't care what the rest of the bird looks like, you know. Belly band could be very bold or it can be very light. There are different subspecies. There are a lot of subspecies of red-tailed hawks in North America. It's double-digit subspecies. Sometimes a western bird will show up in our section of the woods, especially in winter. So we'll get a western red tail, or we'll get a crider, what's known as a crider's hawk type of red tail, very light. But this is the 95+%, I'd say 98% plus percentage of what our red tail hawks. The comma here, these are called, see how this is sort of a translucent, squarish, rectangular to squarish area shining through the outer primaries. we call that a window, especially when it's backlit by the sun or the sky. So that's a good characteristic to help define it. But if you can see a patagio area in the belly band, and even if you don't see a red tail, you probably, because it's blocked, maybe it's perched and the tail's blocked, you can definitely count that as a red tail in your binoculars or scope. But what if you can't see some of those markings like I just said? Well, remember the silhouettes. So notice on this silhouette, when I say secondaries, the primaries of the bird's wings are out here where the fingers are. And then as we get in the middle section here, these are the secondaries, usually 10 or more secondaries, depending on species. And what they mean by bulging secretaries, you notice from the wing here, it's not a straight line to where the tail meets the body. There's sort of a bulge of the secondaries coming out. Tail, that's feather length of the flight feathers. Those are called remiges. And when we say, oh, that bird's got bulging secondaries, well, that might eliminate a possibility or another species. So red tails have bulging secondaries. Look at this shot. The red tail is just beyond the observer, who was me. It was gliding. It's not soaring. It was gliding. It's a typo, but it's a beautio. It's got the belly band. It's got the patagial. But look at how the secondary bulge is just so predominant in this bird. And of course, it's looking back, saying, "You taking my picture? Don't I get some royalties with this?" So it has bulging secondaries, and it seems to be in a slight dihedral, which means the wings are slightly above horizontal in the up position, much like not as exaggerated as the turkey vulture, but you all know how turkey vultures have that dihedral and they teeter back and forth. Well, that's what's meant as a slight dihedral. If all of you know this already, I apologize, but maybe some of you don't. So red-tailed hawks generally soar with the wings held, slight dihedral, and then when they're backlit, as I said before, you can see the squarish to rectangular type windows, which you say, well, you see that bird, and maybe it's a silhouette where you can't really see the body really well, so this is all dark in here. Well, if you see windows that shape, it's not a red shoulder, and I'll tell you why in a second. Because we're going to talk about the red-shouldered hawk now. It's one of the most beautiful videos, I think, that we have in our area. It flaps its wings a little bit more, but you have to be at a hawk watch site maybe to see that more. Has a little bit longer tail in proportion than a red-tailed. Oh, by the way, there will not be a test at the end of this, so don't, you put your pencils down. Don't worry about it. This is a lot of stuff coming at you. Here's another thing that's very at a distance. You notice how the wings sort of are in an arc towards the front of the bird here. It's not a straight line, a wing like the Cooper's was. Notice how when they're in a soar, red tails have a slight arc out towards the front of the wingtips. That's a good identifying factor at a great distance. And it's a red tail. I mean, if you're in this area and you see that, you probably know that you got yourself a red-shouldered hawk. It doesn't matter whether you see a belly band or crescents or anything else. So I'm just saying there are certain characteristics that you can bank on to make an identification. The white crescents, of course, as we all know, right here along the base of the primaries, are what really differentiate, make it easy to identify a red shoulder in flight. And those can even be seen on the top of the bird if you're looking down on the bird, which doesn't happen very often. Another beautio that breeds in West Virginia, the broadwing in the forests, in the upper elevation, all over the state, actually. It's chunky, pro-side, but there is a differentiation. Do you notice the fingers here? Even though they all have fingers, the outer primaries are more pointy relative to shoulder or red tail. And from a distance, it looks like the bird has a candle flame. I call it a candle flame type wingtip. If you see that, and you know it's a buteo from a distance, and you can't see any other marks when it's soaring, you know you probably got yourself a broad-winged hawk, especially in migration. When you see thousands of these birds in one day, I've seen 14,000 broad-winged hawks in one day here, right, not like an hour from where I live, in September when they peak during migration. Okay, so the flame wings, the subterminal band, which is this band here on the bird, is wide black band. That's a good differentiator. Widest black band, a little narrower as you go towards the body, but that differentiates it from a red shoulder, even if you don't see anything else. If you can't see crescents, obviously it doesn't have the crescents of a red shoulder. And this is an adult bird. You see how all the remiges or the secondaries are dark here? You can see that, and it really stands out. Looks like somebody took a pencil or a Sharpie, and I don't mean a sharp chin, a Sharpie pen, and sort of outlined the rear of the feathers. Pretty cool looking. That's a very distinctive bird. Now, there are challenges with this bird. When you get into forested areas, and we have in summer, and you have breeding red shoulders and breeding broad-winged hawks together, young birds can look very, very, very similar from a profile, when they're sitting, not when they're flying. Talk about that in a second. So these are the birds that are known to kettle. When they kettle and catch updrafts and thermals on migration, it's a beautiful sight to behold hundreds of broad-winged hawks kettling during migration. The peak of migration in our area, I would say for here, is between September 10th and probably the 24th of September. Those 2 weeks. You get a 2-week window where it just peaks and then just falls off a cliff. So here's an immature red shouldered against compared to a broadwing. That is a good comparative. This is just comparing. They look very similar, don't they? Similar but different. Feathers stick out a little bit more on the shoulder. A little bit here, you notice the sharp. This is a younger bird, but notice it still has the darkened remiges or the secondaries that look dark. Also, the banding is a little bit different. Has that thicker subterminal band on the tail for the broadwing. And one other thing to note, since these are both young birds, is that typically a broadwing's throat, see the throat area here, is white. And it's brown or darkish in the shoulder. So just, you take all these characteristics together to make an ID. When they're sitting, that's when you say, oh, is that a broadwing or a shoulder? Yep, certainly is. What do you want to put down for the Christmas bird count? Well, you're not going to put this down for the Christmas bird count. Why? Because they're all in South America or Florida or Central America. So, but if you see it in summer or fall before they leave, early fall, the broadwing has a pretty evenly colored greater coverts and back. Where a red shouldered has, you see these are secondaries, they have white barring on them. That's pretty distinctive. So if you see a perch bird and it has white barring, you know yourself, you got a red shouldered over a broad. Okay, let's press on. Falcons, sickle-shaped wings, delta wings, pointy wings, a longish tail compared to their body size. They rarely soar. They do sometimes, but rarely you won't see them soaring like buteos. They're built for speed. They're built for speed, totally. Our most common is the kestrel, the American kestrel. We see them on phone lines. We see them on telephone poles. We see them everywhere. Males, the beautiful blue and gray coloration on the back, and the females brown with the brown striping, and what I call the two-fisted the two-fisted stripe here. You got stripe and the stripe, the mustachio stripe, and then the postocular stripe. Pretty distinctive. Nice shot of a male with the two-tone going. Bright rufous back, bluish wings. Female, more subtle brown with some barring if you get a chance to see that. Usually don't see them on the looking down on the bird. Here's a male. Good way to just is they're white. They would look long, white, longish wings. Notice the very pointed wings that all falcons display. And the male sharp chin, even in flight, you can see that if you get if it's not too backlit, you can see a dark band at the end of the tail. Okay, Merlin. I call this the bullet bird because when you see this bird, it's going at the speed of a bullet. And I even think these birds just go faster through a field of view or through your line of sight than a peregrine, because they're smaller than a peregrine, makes it look like they're moving so much faster to my eye. Just a little bit bigger than a kestrel, but a little bit still. Look at this beautiful delta wing, very pointed wing. All falcons display this crooked back, pointed wing. So you know you got yourself a falcon, even if you don't know what kind you have. A very wide dark subterminal band. I photographed this Merlin after it. I would say what kind of bird is this, but you guys probably already know. It successfully hunted a tree swallow and was having lunch. Powerful fast bird. Now here's a nice shot of a male Merlin, which are gray on the top. Don't get too many good views of Merlins unless they're on breeding grounds. Now, of course, up in Canaan Valley, we have breeding Merlins. So you might have a chance to catch one sitting down somewhere. And I'm sure Herb and Sarah know about that. They probably see them often. They're what they call dimorphic, which means they're different. They look different, the males and the females. The females are brownish and the young are heavily streaked. They all look dark. For my eye, most Merlins, when they fly, regardless of whether they're close or medium or far away, they just look dark underneath because of the heavy barring on the male, heavy barring here. The checkerboard pattern is very distinctive on all of them. So they look like a dark bullet bird going through your field of view. But again, the pointed wings give them away, and they do have that mustachio stripe here. So this is in flight. You got just a matter of seconds to identify a Merlin, typically in flight, when it's going by you or you happen to see one. Now, peregrine falcon is the largest one that we typically see. Beautiful bird, stunning bird. An adult on the left, immature bird on the right, all distinctive with the helmet, what we call the helmet with the very heavy mustachio area, just dark. Looks like it has put on a cap out for a wing. But again, the distinctive falcon pointed wing shape, not quite as checkered on this young one as a Merlin, but it would be noticeably larger. So powerful deep flaps. These birds have been clocked at over 200 miles an hour in the dive. Not by me, but by somebody. Okay. We're getting there. We got a few more species to get through. Everybody loves eagles, but how do you identify them at a distance? They're very large. Okay, cool. But at a distance, eagles look tiny. So there's some distinctive shape. Again, going back to the shapes and the silhouettes, they got large wingspans. I'll digress for a second. When I was starting, and I make mistakes all the time, and I will continue to make mistakes. We were having a flight of birds at the Hawkwatch site at Snickers Gap, and it was broad wing time. And they were gnats. The wind was just right. They were scope birds mostly at 10x binoculars. You could just catch them and see if find a kettle or find some birds. And I yelled out, "Here comes a broadwing." Well, usually broadwings during migration aren't flying by themselves. They can, but they're typically with a group or in kettles. And that broadwing turned out to be a monarch butterfly. So, just goes to show you, don't make the call too early, as we all like to do. But it happens. So the bald eagle, beautiful bird. I took this picture up in the UP of Michigan, and I was actually looking down on the bird, which was kind of unique. So what are the characteristics of a bald eagle? Large protruding head and pretty flat, planky, straight wings. You notice the bird, looks like a 2x6 or something like that, or a 2x8. Just very straight on the front and the back of the bird, large protruding head, then it looks like a board or a plank shape. That's distinctive even at the distance. Even if that's all you see, that's as much detail as you see. And you'll get to compare it to the golden eagle in a minute. They're brown. Immature bald eagles can cause confusion, but not terrible. Takes 5 years for a bald eagle to reach adulthood. So white can be mostly anywhere. If you see a lot of white in the wing linings or this area, which it says wing pit, but those are known as axillaries of the bird, you've eliminated golden eagle right off the bat, because golden eagles will never look like that in any plumage. And there's a couple other things I'll talk about when we get to golden eagle. And here's another thing. You probably, if you get a chance, do you notice on the secondaries of this bird how it's not an even line? It looks like there's some of them that are longer than others. Well, this is a bird that's not a juvenile, because juvenile bald eagles got their first secondaries. They haven't molted anything yet. So it'll be a very straight line. And this is very noticeable in binoculars in flight, even if they're soaring or whatever. You'll be able to say whether it's it's in its first calendar year or whether it's somewhere between 2 and 5 after that. So this is at least a second calendar year bird because of the different length of secondary feathers. Golden eagle, another large soaring bird, 6 to 7 foot wingspan. Underneath, this is an adult bird. You notice how the linings of the bird can look grayish. It's not turkey vulture grayish, but it's not as dark as the carpal area in the front. Different shape though. I want you to notice. Here's the two characteristics of a golden eagle. If you don't see any plumage, it's not a plank. You see the secondaries bulge out a little bit. This is noticeable in flight. Also, the head projection, it's like one. I'm not going to give you say it's 1/2 the size. Depends on your angle and where you are. But it's noticed when you see enough of them and compare, it's noticeably smaller head projection than a bald eagle. Bald eagle has a very, very distinct large head projection. All right. So, and this happens to be an adult. So if you can see golden nape, which is the back of the bird's head feathers, you got yourself a golden eagle. And you typically will have yourself an immature golden eagle if you see white wing patches, the base of the inner primary. And you can even see these white wing patches on the top side of the bird. And of course, then the base of the tail will be very white, very broad white base of the tail band. In flight, very, very easy to pick up in flight. So that's an immature golden eagle. My bad. All right, the osprey, we all know the osprey comes up in late March from Central America, South America, has a distinctive M shape, or I call it the M profile. It looks like it has a crooked wing. So not too hard to identify an osprey. Once you see that shape, you don't have to see anything else around here. And it's a decent sized bird. You've got yourself an osprey. Dark, this is the carpal patches on the wrist. Very distinctive. Obviously, good enough, you'll see the eye line, dark eye line in flight. Females, if you're lucky enough to see them close enough, the females will either see this little dark area, dark smudging. It can be brownish smudging. That females will have that. Males will typically be almost washed out or have no necklace, as we call it, at all. If you want to sex your ospreys. Couple more birds and we'll be finito. Northern Harrier, one of my favorites. Why? Because I usually can look down on them because they're hunting in a field about 5 feet off the ground, teetering back and forth with those long wings and that long tail, and they're just stunning. They have a distinctive, have a slender body in the dihedral, but you see the face of this bird looks almost like an owl face, like an owl disc, just like some of the owls might have. So it has, and of course, the most distinctive feature of other than these features, slender body, long tail, long narrow wings, where it's flying, where it's hunting, will be the white rectangular rump patch, which you will see on the next slide, I hope. The females have belly streaking. Females and immatures are a little harder to tell in flight, depending on distance. Both are brownish. Adult males, who call them the gray ghost because they have these beautiful black tips. If you see a male harrier, it's a stunning sight. Just beautiful bird. Black wingtips. I thought I had a white rump patch picture in here. There it is. Both sexes will display the white rectangular rump patch. Now, having said that, other birds in flight display a white rump patch, like Cooper's hawks and red-tailed hawks, but they won't have these other characteristics like the long wings, the long tail going along with that. So, and of course, the way the harrier looks. If you get a good enough, the shape is distinctive with those long wings and long tail. So you get the white rump patch with the long wings and the long tail, even gliding way overhead with flapping, sort of languid flapping, flap, flap, flap. You got yourself a northern harrier. Now, this is the last hawk. Not one we see very often. It's rare, except for Herb and Casey, Rutger, the folks that live up and around Canaan Valley and the higher mountain elevations in the winter. Not that we can't see them anywhere else in the state, we do. But if rough-leggeds will overwinter in Canaan Valley, and there's light morphs and dark morphs, but they're still all distinctive no matter what the morph. They have a broad white subterminal band and a black band here and the very dark purple markings, which will be very distinctive no matter what morph it is. Excuse me. It's too much soda right there. But a beautiful winter bird that comes down from boreal Canada to come spend the winters in our boreal Canada area. But I've seen them here in Jefferson and Berkeley counties, and I'm sure you all have seen them from time to time in Mon County or, out in your areas down and around Morgantown. So it's just that they're more prevalent up in the higher elevation because that's where they'll spend the winter. So if you want to look for a rough-legged hawk and you want to see one and study one, go to Canaan Valley. Just make sure your snow tires are good in the wintertime. So caveats as we close. Keep the following in mind. Birds change depending on their light, their angle, view, the winds, and you can never see too many. You can never see too many. A falcon in a glide may spread its tail, ooh, and then it'll look like a falcon. But the wings still give it away. The wing shape still gives it away as a falcon. A buteo looks different if it's going away from you, but look at those bulging secondary. Remember we talked about bulging secondary. Most likely this is a red tail silhouette. Looks like a red tail when seen at an angle. So final few points. I don't have no idea how we're doing for time, but nobody is right 100% of the time. You take the aggregate of all your clues, whether it's behavior, whether it's shape, whether it's flight, it's length of tail, length of body, whatever clues you can get, put as many as you can together to come to an ID. Once you've ID'd it, this is what too many bird watchers do, in my opinion. They don't study birds once they've identified the bird. Oh, don't study it. I see it. Oh, it's a red tail. Cool. Bye. Well, stay on that bird. Study it. See how it looks when it's leaving. See how it looks when it's coming. See how it looks when it's circling and soaring above your head. Maybe you'll see something different that reminds you in the future of how it will help you identify a red tail maybe in a further distance next. So here's some resources. Hawk migration, of course, Humana, not to be confused with the pharmaceutical people. HU, it's not Humana, it's Humana. Raptor population. These are just some sites. Book references. There are some great book references. The late, great Jerry LaCourie, who just passed away right before Christmas of Lou Gehrig's disease, did a lot for the birding community on raptor identification, especially at a distance. And so it's his two books are not long, not large, but full of a lot of good detail. And of course, there's apps for smartphones. You got the Merlin Bird ID app, which some of you may already use. And there's a Raptor ID informational app that's free for smartphones for Android or iPhone from Hawkwatch International. So I think I've talked enough. So I'm going to stop sharing. And it's over to Hannah.
Yes, thank you so much, Matt. That was very informative. We are opening it up to questions. So just as a reminder how to ask those questions, you can either write it in the chat box and I'll read it out loud, or if you want to ask your question yourself, feel free to raise your hand or write in the chat box that you would like to ask your question, and then we can invite you to unmute. So, any questions?
Well, I see we didn't lose anybody, so at least it must have been semi-interesting. It's like anything else in bird watching. You get out of something what you put into. You decide to put the time and effort into it. I know maybe it's just a hobby. That's fine. We all have hobbies. But the more you put into your hobbies, the more you'll learn, and you'll never learn it all. You'll never learn it all.
For those people who want to improve their Hawk ID, what would your suggestions be to go about that? Like, how would you find hawks?
Well, I would say first, whatever you can find around your local patch is great. And if you see hawks during breeding season, that's fine. But I highly recommend in the fall, find a hawk watch site. Allegheny Front can't be that far from Morgantown. I know it's not like right up the road at Cooper's Rock, but you can go to Cooper's Rock and maybe on a good thermal day see hawks going by in migration, right? And in the open area. But I would definitely recommend, like I did. I went to hawk watch sites and just watched these people that just amazed me. I could identify a red tail if it was like close, but they were identifying red tails when they looked like mosquitoes. And then when it finally got here about 2 minutes later, it was a red tail. And I just got mesmerized by that. So I wanted to learn how to do that. So I highly recommend finding a hawk watch site, Allegheny Front, Wagner's Gap. You can go on the hawk count. What's that, one of those links? Was hawkcount.org, and they have all the hawk count sites and all their numbers for the entire season and all previous years. And it shows you where we are, how we are. So I highly recommend.
Cool. And then we have a question. When would golden eagles be in the area?
Good question. Golden eagles start migrating through from the north because they breed in Canada for the most part and northern tier U.S. states. Around Halloween until Thanksgiving is the best time. First couple of weeks of November is probably peak if you want to see golden eagles in numbers. I'll tell you, y'all might remember Hurricane Sandy back in 2011 or 12? It bottled up, it came right around Halloween, and it bottled up birds for like 3 or 4 days before it pulled out. I went to Wagner's Gap the first day we could get up there after, and all these birds released. And of course, it was November 2nd or 3rd. And I took a group up there. We went up there. I hoped to see we could see some golden eagles. Good chance. We got there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I said, "Y'all seen any golden eagles yet?" He goes, "Yeah, there's 4 of them right here." And there was 4 golden eagles flying right overhead. We saw 36 golden eagles that day, and 6 goshawks. So that's the best day. But if you go up in early November and you can catch goshawks on a good wind, northwest wind, so dress warm, you can see goshawks and golden eagles and at least have a good chance at identifying, seeing immatures, adults, and the whole thing.
Cool.
Yes, I see. It seems like I'm having less rough-leggeds. Yes. I'm seeing less rough-leggeds in the last 20 years too, Herb. So again, that gets back to my point. I don't know if there's less rough-leggeds or whether they're not coming down like they used to because they don't have to. Because feeding, they can still have good hunting grounds north.
And then we have a question. Can you talk about the marks differentiating perched red-taileds and perched rough-leggeds?
Well, the rough-legged, I'm doing this right off top of my head, of course, because I'm looking at you, Hannah. Perched red-tail, you will see either the belly band, and of course, the rough-leggeds will look like they can have a belly band too. But the rough-leggeds will have a distinctive base of the tail. Will have that white base of the tail, that white band at the base of the tail, and then the dark band perched, and you should see that. Red tail would obviously have, if it's an adult, a red tail, or a finely barred brown tail if it's a young bird, like a first-year bird in the winter, because that's when you'd be seeing rough-leggeds around. And of course, a rough-legged, my eye, has a little bit more white in its head as a general rule, just perception. You see that's not saying you can't come across leucistic type birds if everybody knows what that means, or some birds that might have a little bit look whiter. Yes, but if you see so you put all those together, and I think those are the first clues on how I would look for rough-legged to red-tailed perched looking.
Cool. And then you had mentioned kettling. Which of these birds are likely or unlikely to be seen kettling?
Yeah. Well, the most where the term comes from, the birds that seen kettling are broadwings. Next is broadwings. Next is broadwings. Next would be turkey vultures. Next would be black vultures. Well, they kettle. But after that, you will get occasionally some birds in 2s or 3s, some sharpies hanging, migrating together, doing a sharpie dance, and then pressing on. Rare, you will not see falcons kettle. Eagles, well, you've all probably have seen some bald eagles migrating together. If you haven't, you should. They'll go in singles or pairs. I rarely see over 3, maybe, together. I mean, you'll have one, and then 5 minutes later you'll have one, but they're not together. So I'd say the broadwings where the term kettling comes from. And if you want to see hundreds of hawks in one binocular view at one time, go to a hawk watch site around the 18th to 20th of September on a nice thermal day, and you should get some kettling broadwings there. But so kettling, the vultures and the broadwings are the most dominant kettlers in my mind.
Yeah, I guess a related question, is it the Washington Monument where you saw those kettling broadwings?
You can, I have, but I've seen them everywhere I go during the right time of year. You have to know, if you go onto hawkcount.org and look at some of the hawk watch sites, you'll see when birds move through. Off the top of my head, the first birds that move through, and I'll go fast. Late August through late September, you're going to have kestrels start to fire up. You're going to have Mississippi kites, but they're not really in the discussion here. And then broadwings are the next really on the mark. Now you will see a smattering of red tails and shoulders, red shoulders, but how do you know they're not local birds just going up and taking a dance and they're not really migrating, right? So they don't get kicking red tails and red shoulders. So you have broadwings in mid-September, and then you have the accipiters pick up in later September. So you have Coopers and the falcons, Coopers, Sharpies, Peregrine, Merlin, and kestrels still going through until maybe mid-October. Then your red shoulders. October is the best diversity month. Harriers, shoulders, red tails start to pick up. And then as you get towards the end of the month, red tails peak, and that the golden eagles start. The goshawks, if there's any, would start. Golden eagles would start, and they will carry you through to almost Thanksgiving. And then as you get to Thanksgiving, then it's your rough-legged, which is probably your last of the migrants to come through. The hawk watches that dress really, really, really warm, and hawk watch through December usually see some rough-leggeds like Wagner's Gap, but those numbers are like single digits. We're not talking a lot of birds over a lot of period. So that's sort of the flow of the migration in the fall.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions? If not, thank you again, Matt, for that awesome presentation, for answering all those questions. We really appreciate it. And that concludes our meeting. Hopefully we'll see you guys again next month.
Okay, we'll see you.
Yep, thank you.